while you have times of the day that are super hot and you don't want to be outside, there are times of the day your brain is super hot and that's when you want to be focused on it, right? And you need to just be aware and spend your time there. Those critical tasks that you've already had ranked, they need to fit into those slots in some way. This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others.
Okay, Brent, the next thing on our list to talk about is time management, and I am going to challenge you in this time management episode. I feel like if we're going to tell other people how to manage their time, you need to be able to manage our time.
And to be clear, I hate this. This is structured you versus unstructured me.
This one time we're going with a structured
version.
version.
For the purposes of what we're talking about. If we're going to talk about time management, I can appreciate the need for some structure. And so tell me what box are you trying to fit me in exactly?
So I have asked Brent to brainstorm 5 top things that he thinks that everyone needs in order to be able to manage their time more productively. And I am giving him 5 minutes to discuss each of these 5 categories. And if he can do this, we will have a 30-minute episode for the Business Minutia Podcast.
What do I get if I win?
You get a 30-minute episode for the Business Minutia Podcast.
All right. I'm
the
competitive
The great thing is you get to start with an intro, and this doesn't count against any of your 5 minutes, but it's a short intro.
And the listeners can
not
be
a
like,
wordy intro.
I don't have to listen to this guy for an hour this time? Deal.
So why, Brent, do you think that time management is such an important topic?
Wait, does this count now?
You're starting.
Oh, good grief. Come on, man. All right. So the best descriptor I would give for the value of time management is something that I heard maybe 2-3 weeks ago from an author and a speaker I like to listen to, a guy named Bob Goff. And he had, he was on another podcast, I think with Donald Miller, and he threw out a statistic that I had to go look up. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly correct. You get 27,375 days. On average, a human gets 27,375 days. By now, how many of those are already consumed? Right? When I started thinking this way, then I realized, I think early in your life, you're like, the number one resource I need is money. Because in college, my dream was just to have a new truck. I just wanted to buy a new truck one day. I'd see these new trucks rolling around campus, and I'm like, I want a truck one day. Over time, once you bought a truck and you accomplish certain things, you start to realize, the real resource that I'm short of is time. And time becomes extremely valuable. And so when I think about using my time at work, using my time away from work, everywhere, I want to make the most of the time that I've got. And so therefore, time management becomes very critical.
Wow, Brent, that was actually short and sweet. I'm very impressed.
Reasonably short and sweet. The clock is ticking.
It is ticking.
And this is 2.5 minutes that includes my outro.
Yes.
So, okay. All right. We got to get started.
So now we're going into the first thing on your list, Brent.
I don't even get to pause?
No. Hit it.
Okay. All right. Number 1 on my list, I would say, is learning to do things that you really don't want to do and learning ways to go do those effectively.
But I don't want to do them.
I know you don't. And that's why you have to get really efficient at doing them, because I want to spend my time on things that matter to me. I want to spend my time on things that are engaging my brain. Everybody's got different things they want to do. Whether you want to spend more time playing video games, or you want to spend more time with your kid, or you want to spend more time being philanthropic, whatever the thing is that you want to go do, there are certain things that have to get done, right? It's like the old joke from the movie Office Space, where the guy's talking about people being tested for what things are really good at, and you should only focus on things you're really good at. And the guy makes a joke about, well, the whole test is garbage, because if it were really true, there'd be nobody taking trash out. Right. There's still some things that you have to get that just have to get done, and so the key to me is maximizing the efficiency of those things, or innovating ways to make them go away completely. But ultimately, and we talk about this as we educate our kids, so much of education is learning to do things and learning, disciplining yourself to be able to learn things.
Right. Just because you don't like writing an essay or you don't like algebra doesn't give you an excuse not to do either one of those things.
So time management matters to this because you want to get really good at knocking these things out, because there are going to be things that you don't want to do. Doesn't this get into the old book? And I think you read the book and I lost interest in it. It was Eat the Frog.
Yeah, it's been a long time. But
what was the basic concept of Eat the Frog?
The basic concept was whatever it is that you hate doing that you have to do, knock it out first to make sure it's done.
The idea is if you had to eat a frog every day, you'd just do that as soon as you got up and get the pain over with.
Right, get it done.
And so that's an element of time management to me, is there are things that are going to be on your to-do list that are going to continuously get pushed to the back.
So for example, what kinds of things are these in your life?
Oh my goodness gracious. If I have really deep technical data analysis, if I got to stare at data for a long time, it takes me a while to really get to it, or anything like that. There are certain presentations that I have to put together, and for whatever reason in my brain, I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. And it's usually because there's something that's there that's in the way that I'm avoiding. Right. And I have to I got to attack it. I have to figure out ways to go attack that and get those things done first. Right. And then we'll get into this. I think that goes really, to me, into the second item. I'm ahead of schedule. Look
You're
at
doing
this.
Well. Keep going.
The second item that I would say is really critical is you've got to break the tasks down. You got to break the tasks down that you have by how long they take and how critical they are, right? So I like to have my tasks bucketed, and you can do this throughout the week. You can be really formal about this and write it on paper or write it on a dry erase board, whatever you do that makes sense for you. I think early in my career, I did a lot more formal writing these things down and a lot of Post-it note type things. Now I still jot things down physically in a notebook. That helps me. But you can also see, I'm looking at my dry erase board that has the same concepts I'm talking about.
You have dry erase boards all over the house.
I like to think on my feet. So being on my feet helps. But I like to break these tasks, the things that I've got on my to-do list, and I want them visible for me throughout the week. And I break them up into 10-minute tasks or something in and around this. There's no hard, fast rules on the time. But I'll break them into 10-minute tasks, 30 to 60-minute tasks, and then things that are really over an hour, right? Okay. Now, here's where, and the reason I'll break those up that way is I may have a list of 3 or 4 or 5. Usually the reality is in your 10-minute tasks, you have about 100, but you're going to have a bunch of 10-minute tasks sometimes. Right. And then sometimes you may have a bunch of 60-minute tasks. And then so I like to bucket those together and have each of those set aside and listed so I can go put those in the right times of my calendar throughout the day.
Now for you, how do you know when you need to break down those hour-long tasks into 2 30-minute tasks?
In general, I don't want a task that's over an hour.
Okay.
Because I don't get more than an hour to dedicate to things very often. Right. Now, every job is going to be a little bit different. There were times in my life where I was sitting on a piece of equipment doing engineering work and writing software, and those could be 3-hour intervals. So there are cases like that where you are going to have big chunks of time. But in general, I try now to not have any tasks that are over an hour. Now, again, there will be certain cases where you may not have a choice, but I want to try to break those into, even those cases where I was sitting on a piece of equipment for 3 hours, I would have that 3 hours broken down into specific. The first hour I want to work on this. The second hour I want to work on this.
Right. And sometimes you're giving a presentation for an hour and you can't really break that down.
Sure.
It's an hour.
That's right. But even if you're trying to prepare for a presentation, prep for that presentation may take you well over an hour. But break those tasks into sub pieces so that they're less than an hour so you can fit them in throughout your day.
Now, if you've allotted yourself an hour and it only took 45 minutes, do you throw one of those 10-minute tasks in there, or? Maybe.
Also, don't forget to take a break, as this is where you can become overstructured, and then by the end of the day, you're burned out, right? And so you may be better to just go grab a cup of coffee and reward yourself a little bit, but it just depends. If I've got 15 minutes and I know I have tons of 10-minute tasks, I may throw one of those in.
Well, and there are so many people working from home right now. I know that if I get up from my desk to go get a cup of coffee, that means, mom is available and it's going to be interruption.
But really what you're highlighting is the value of bucketing the tasks this way. If you bucket these tasks like this, and I do, and like let's say 15 minutes, maybe not so great, but I'll have cases where I had an hour conference call that got cut short and I got 30 minutes back. Maybe it was just half as long as expected, or sometimes they're 15 minutes and I'm done. Then I'm going to go grab, okay, I've got 45 minutes till my next meeting. I want maybe 10, 15 of that to go grab a cup of coffee. And then I'll say, well, I've got 15 minutes to go tackle something, and then I can go to my list of 15-minute tasks.
Right.
And I've already got those ranked. You need to have those ranked by priority. Okay. We could talk about prioritization as a whole separate, episode we'd have to get into.
Not in this 30 minutes.
But I'll have those ranked based on, and those are going to be based on, I'm tempted to get into it, but I won't. I'll just have them ranked in some way.
Right.
And then I will grab the first one on that list and start working those down. So when I get those little windows, I'll throw those in and knock those out. So you're ranking those tasks, you're breaking them up. Your stuff that's over an hour, try to break those into smaller pieces. So if I've got, for example, I need to get this entire PowerPoint presentation done, and I know that's going to take me 2 hours of prep and an hour of something else, right? If that's going to break it into a smaller piece. Okay, what's the first 2 slides? Well, the first 2 slides are about the problem statement and talking about why this needs to get done. Okay, what do I need to enable that? Well, I want to go see some data and I want to bring in some data here. Okay, break that piece up into which really gets into the third piece.
Okay.
Which is, I think, the most critical. And this is where I started. I've had people say, you manage time really well. Nothing ever falls between the cracks with you. Well, it used to. I think this was a key thing for me when I really got better at this. And I got this from a training class. I think I went to a class that was talking about time management. And it is really managing the next effort required, or managing the next action.
Okay.
You cannot think of things as this brick wall and say, I'm going to tackle this enormous brick wall. That task has a tendency to get put off and put off and put off. You've got to break it into small tasks so that you can manage the next effort, the next activity. And this particularly gets challenging when, especially if you're in a leadership role, you may have individuals that are driving projects, but you're trying to juggle and drive, 10, 15 projects at one time. And so you're trying to keep all these balls juggled in the air. So you need to manage the next task on that project. So project A, it looks like a giant brick wall. You can't have, just complete project A. Well, that could take 6 months. You need to break it into, okay, the next step for project A really is I need to perform some data analytics, or I need to go look at some data to understand X. Okay, if you're going to need to do that, maybe that's a roadblock for you. Maybe that's too much of an ambiguous task. Maybe you would say, well, I'm not the best at that, but I know person Y over here is really good at that. Well, the next action might be for you to schedule the meeting to have a conversation with person Y about the topic.
Right. We've noticed the same thing with entrepreneurs that are starting a small business. I went through the same thing when I was starting my freelance writing. It becomes overwhelming, the amount of stuff it takes to actually start a business, right? And if you can break those down and figure out, okay, I need to figure out the finances, the marketing, and make your entire list, and then tackle those individual items.
And break those into next actions.
Absolutely.
What is the next thing that you need to, and then once you close that action, you need to immediately track what the next thing is. I don't close if I'm in that meeting with person Y discussing, I'm closing that meeting with, okay, the next task that I need to do is this. And I'm aligning with that person, even I think the key thing to do is this. And that allows me to keep the ball moving. If you don't get that, now you don't have to do that in the meeting, but by the end of the close of the day or the close of whatever cadence makes sense for you and your job, I would say on a daily basis, I would want to say, all right, where am I on this? Where am I on this? Okay, here are the next actions that I have for those things. So you're keeping the ball moving forward. You're keeping things progressing.
Right. And I take the first 15 minutes of my day every day and see what my list is of the priorities I have for that day based on what I actually got done the day before. And I will lay out the next week on Friday but I probably go a little crazy with it.
Mine is more weekly. I mean, there are cases where I'll dig into things on a daily cadence, but for the most part, weekly typically serves me well. If I get too detailed or things, it just depends on how fast and what those actions are what those things are, the tasks you're working.
Right.
If they're quick closing things that are, vanishing, in less than 5 minutes, yeah, you probably need to manage those on a daily basis. But if your tasks are, between 1 and 4 hours and you're breaking those into pieces and they're not all moving and closing in a given day, then it can make more
become
sense.
tedious.
It can make more sense to manage those on a weekly basis. So weekly fits me a little bit better, but it
Right.
really just depends on the kinds of tasks and how fast.
Okay, Brent,
You're
you are
closing
doing
those.
fantastic on
I'm on
time.
schedule. All right.
We're doing
I'm
great.
on task. All right. So I've gone through those. The fourth thing that was critical that I wanted to highlight, and this one will probably take a little bit longer, is work on your most critical. So you've got your list, your ranked of items that are your 30 to 60 minute tasks, your 10-minute tasks, your 30 to 60 minute tasks, your greater than an hour task. And those buckets need to be interchangeable for your particular work schedule and what your life looks like. If your tasks are, I don't have any 10-minute tasks. Okay, scale all these to what makes sense for what
Right,
you do.
right.
Okay. And then you need to have a method of ranking those. We're not going to get into prioritization and ranking here. I won't have time. But you need to have a mechanism that you're ranking those. And you need to have an absolute ranking. Not just it's good to know what your top 10-minute tasks are, and it's good to know what your top 60-minute tasks are, but you need to also be able to gauge, if you can't just automatically, be able to gauge and put some system to it that says, all right, this one's the most critical, right?
Yep.
And so you're carving your time and carving your day out. I'm not talking about just waiting until reacting. I'm talking about you need to carve proactively your day around this. And this really gets into, that's really my fourth point, is you need to be aware of what your prime time is. What is prime time for your brain? When are you most effectively thinking? When is the time of day where you're just in the zone, right?
Man, when I learned this about myself, my entire life seemed to fall more into place. It's like, oh, I completely missed that.
Yeah, and we've joked about, the podcast editing that we have to do. If we both do our recording sessions late in the evening, the chances are we're going to have a lot more editing to do because neither of us is really in the zone.
Right.
I'm more of an evening person.
I am a morning
but
person.
you're a morning person.
Yeah.
And so middle of the day winds up being the best time, or in the afternoon or early afternoon,
Right.
or right after 5 or something like that winds up making sense for us to try to capture and record like we are right now. But you need to figure out in your mind, for how your brain works, what is the prime time for you. And then if you can, you need to carve out those critical tasks at that time of day. Now, if it depends on the kind of tasks you're talking about. If you're working, for example, if it's solo, critical, strategic thinking, those types of things, you need to carve out that time of your day for that type of task. And you need to do what you can to go make sure this happens, right? I would say you need to try to, you can be tactful. I've had cases and times where I had really critical strategic thinking that I had to go do associated with PowerPoints or communication or something. And the time of day where I was really at my prime, it was critical for that week, had to get done. People kept scheduling meetings with me.
Yep.
And I had to say, hey, I've got something critical that I'm working on. I value you, but I'm going to need to push this into next week
Right.
because of some things that I've got to go do.
Right.
Or I can catch you in the morning, but that's a time slot that I need to go dedicate for this.
Because the essential thing to realize is just because it's a priority for you doesn't mean it's anybody else's priority.
Not at all. And you need to protect and discipline and firewall your time so that you're taking advantage of that time. And the prime time is no joke. You need to take that very seriously, right?
Right. And for me, prime time is first thing in the morning. I've mentioned that before. But you see all of these, motivational gurus that say you need to make sure you get up and knock out your workout first thing in the morning. If I am on the treadmill at 6 a.m., I have failed for me.
And I agree with you. And I think there'll be a lot of people who don't agree, because I know tons of people are like, oh, you got to get up at 6 and hit that cardio. Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think you got to find the right time that works for you and your schedule.
I've got to schedule in my day, but
yeah, you got to find the right time. I would say, and maybe and I'm sure all kinds of different jobs are different, right? I mean, if I was digging ditches, the prime time for me might be in the morning when it's nice and cool.
Right.
But the same concept applies. There's an ideal part of the day that makes sense. But my point is, while you have times of the day that are super hot and you don't want to be outside, there are times of the day your brain is super hot, and that's when you want to be focused on it, right? And you need to just be aware and spend your time there. Those critical tasks that you've already had ranked, they need to fit into those slots in some way, right? You mentioned email, okay? That's not the time you should be jacking with email.
No.
If you have strategic solo work, you're writing code, you're coming up with strategy and direction for your organization or whatever it is, your business, and you're trying to think through those things, You don't need to be sitting with email. You don't need to be looking at text messages. You need to silence your phone. You need to find ways so you're taking advantage of that time.
Right. And depending upon what you do, I mean, I literally go through and turn my phone on airplane mode and turn off the internet on my computer and all of that. It's just, if you can totally firewall yourself, you're better off.
Yes. And you get into the email thing, and I know we'll talk about this in a separate episode, but I do want to give a shout out to a guy named Tim Ferriss. A lot of folks know this guy's a hardcore time management guy, and he's got books out there. There's one called The 4-Hour Workweek that's really good. But he's pretty hardcore when it comes to email and time management. He'll tell people, I check email between noon and 1, and if you get in that list and you get a response, then you're welcome, right?
Right.
But it's a little aggressive. I think there are some jobs that you'd probably better clear your inbox, or at least come up with a process or strategy for how you're going to communicate and let people know at least. And I think he would even say he would let people know in advance, hey, I'm working to be more efficient. Can you help me? This is how I'm being more efficient. I'm only going to respond to email once a day or twice a day. I do like that concept, right? So certainly in my prime time when I'm working on something, I have to close Outlook. I can't be looking at email or whatever. I can't be looking at that. I've got and in fact, some people will see if I'm in a meeting and I flip my phone over, it's because I don't want to see flashing things. I want to focus and engage in what I don't want to, because I'm distracted by, it's like a Jack Russell Terrier barking and just jumping. I have to have it out of the way so it's not.
Right. And the way social media is right now, I mean, you're constantly getting updates on people posting, funny puppies.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know how many times I've been interrupted by somebody and I look at it and that doesn't matter. It's a cat video. I don't have time for this.
But that does go into your number 5.
Well, before I jump to 5, I also want to say that there are some times when your peak performance is needed in a group setting. And it's not necessarily a solo critical thought. So if I've got a presentation that's really important to me, I will also try to schedule that at a time when I know I'm at my best performance. I want it to be at and again, that's if you can control that, right? I will try to schedule that at a time where I know I'm going to be at my best, right? I think that's important. The other thing I want to highlight on this before we jump to the 5th one is, and I'm going to wind up eating into my time that I was ahead on earlier, but I think this is important. You have to allot time for the small tasks too. Like I see one of two things happen. People will tackle the small tasks because I can knock a bunch of those out and I feel good because I got more of those done.
Check.
And then they left the big one. Well, if the big one was the frog you were supposed to eat, then that's a failure. If it was the most critical on your list, you should have done that first, right? Or you should at least made plans to nail that down first.
Right.
Doesn't mean it had to happen before 10 a.m. on Monday, but if your prime time was between 1 and 4, you better have chipped away at that during that time slot if it was the most critical one. To be clear,
I prefer that everything happened before 10 a.m.
I don't want to start till 10 a.m. because my brain's not really functioning fully yet. I need coffee and I don't want to hear from anybody until at least 9 if I can help it.
Right. And
then once I get the engine moving, I'm ready. All right, let's go. I've had some coffee. Now I'm ready to go. By 1, I am really kicking it. And oftentimes, some of my most productive times are 5 to 7. That's when I'm really in the zone. Right. So
I am not.
Everybody's different. That's the point. Everybody's different. The other thing, back to my earlier point, I think you want to allot time for the small tasks too. A lot of times people will. So I was talking about what happens if you knock out all the easy ones and you leave the big one. You also will have cases where you are knocking out the big one and then you forget about the little ones, and then another big one comes along. It's also critical, and you keep doing this and you keep doing this, and in some jobs you've got something that would have taken you 10 minutes. That's been piling up and eventually turns into an escalation. And then eventually, people start asking, what's going on? Why can't you not do this simple task? You need to allocate some time for the small tasks too.
Okay, so you have now covered learning to do things you don't want to do. And number 2 was breaking down the tasks into the most critical steps and then doing the next effort. And the 4th one was figuring out what your best time is and scheduling your most important things during that prime time. What is number 5?
Did all that time count against me too?
Absolutely. Every second.
Every second. The last one I would say is you need to take time to reflect and time to celebrate, right? So, anytime you get enough, we don't celebrate enough.
We don't.
If you have something that's successful, we have a tendency to be like, hey, that's cool.
Move on to the next
and we're
task.
immediately tackling
That's exactly
the next.
right.
Take the time to celebrate. Okay. That's worth taking the time. Take the time and celebrate, and also take the time to reflect. So I will try at the end of a week, and I probably do this more on Monday morning than I do on Friday. By Friday, I'm just zoned out, and all I can think about is a weekend. But on Monday morning, I will sit down and think through, okay, how productive was I last week? What was the time? And sometimes I've had phases of my career when I was just focusing really heavy on that in the first, just every day. I would go through and be like, where did I spend my time today? I especially did that, I would say 3 weeks into the work from home thing, when I realized this could be a while.
Right.
And I started going, how am I spending my time? This is not effective. I'd gone 2 weeks with no cardio, and I'm like, okay, because my cardio time had been eaten up. Right. And so by other things, and I go, okay, I need to readjust my schedule. So now I try to work out during my lunch hours, and I'm not eating, which is better for me particularly, or I can eat something small or healthy, and then I move on about my day.
Right.
So I think finding ways to assess your day or assess your week, having that time to reflect, to look back and think about where to, use your calendar, look back over your calendar and you can look at that proactively and look, how is my week target? How am I partitioning things this week? How am I working that out? Does it make sense?
Again, I am crazy at scheduling. I kind of overschedule, but I always go through at the end of the week, and I have highlighters that mark different things: family, writing, my nonprofit work, and I go through and highlight things, and then I can look at did I have too much pink?
Right.
Did I have too much blue? Did I have too much green?
Yeah.
I'm a visual person. That works for me.
Right. I've seen that done in Outlook as well. People will highlight certain colors or certain tasks, certain colors. Then they can visually just look across their calendar and say, okay, that's about right. Because they could look at it and say, I want to be 50% here, 50% there. I want to be 20% here and 60%, or 80% there. And I think having those color coordinated, you can go quickly look at it and be like, all right. And I don't think you need to do that every week. I think, but an assessment, whatever cadence makes sense for you.
Especially if you feel like you're a little bit off balance.
That's what triggers me. And I go, okay, something's off. Or, man, I waited till a last minute on something. If something came down to the last minute, that's a trigger for me. The last minute to me is like the day before, right? Because I like to be way ahead if I can. And so when I see cases like that, I'll stop and be like, okay, something's broken. And from a leadership perspective, it's usually a delegation issue or something like that.
Right.
That I'm not delegating enough. Or
the same type of thing can work on your finances, right? If you go back and you look at where your money went last month.
Tells you where your priorities are, right?
Absolutely.
Same goes with your time here.
That's right.
And so again, the more effective you can be in with your time during the day, it's more time that you've got for your kid. It's more time you've got for your wife. It's more time that you've got for mountain biking, your husband, for whoever, your partner. All that time is back to you to do something else. Or, okay, more time for you to go be proactive and innovating within your job.
Right.
Right. And so, which kind of teases into a future episode that we'll talk about, is reacting versus being proactive. Like, if I have extra time here, I would just use that as you need to focus on being proactive and finding ways to innovate, because that's what's going to differentiate you, not how fast you can get things done necessarily in a reactive environment. But all right, that'll take so much longer.
I am super proud of you.
Take so much longer.
I am
to cover
super
that.
proud of you with time management. You have knocked this out of the park.
So I have all this extra. I have like 3 minutes.
No, but you still have the music that you put into the beginning.
Yeah, it's like 30 seconds. So I get extra time to just say whatever I want. 27,375 days, people. That's the average time that human gets. How are you spending the time that you have? And you break that down, and how are you spending the time every day? That's where it started to trigger me. Time is one of the most, in my opinion, the most valuable resource, because it's severely limited. It's the only guarantee you got. If you're born, you're going to die. You only got so many days. How are you using them?
Right. And we just started the school year with our kids. And one of the questions that I ask them to start the school year every year is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And what are you doing today that's helping you get there? Yeah.
You'll hear people sometimes say, write your obituary. Which is a little morbid, but the same concept is applying. It's getting you to think about how you're spending your time, right? Think about how and we're working this backwards, saying, how are you spending your day?
Right.
Think about that. Hey, people, think about this week. We did kind of a new approach here. Bang, bang, hit you with a bunch of stuff. It's helpful. We'd like to hear feedback. Have a good week. And I'm on time.